Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode number 3 of Conflict Coverage. Today, we're going to be staying with Ukraine as Russian forces continue to mount on the Ukrainian border, and I want to discuss 4 possible outcomes which could happen if Putin decides to press the button and authorize military action of official Russian forces in Ukraine. Let's take a look at 4 possible outcomes for him, or 4 objectives he might want to seize through his militaristic aims. So, before we begin, let's take a look at what the situation is in terms of the build-up of actual Russian forces. So, as you can see, I've made a little map here. Let's start with Moldova. Now, Moldova in the breakaway region does have some Russian forces, and they've begun a series of military exercises. I did actually speak to a source on the ground there who did tell me they're not too worried, as this is nothing new. This is something that's always happening. But in relation to the build-up of what's happening around Ukraine, that is a bit more worrying than usual, in my opinion. Next, we have Crimea, obviously, has been annexed by Russia. And over the last few days, using this new little bridge that they built, they have been shipping quite a few military vehicles into Crimea. So that gives Russia a good little launch pad into South Ukraine here. They've already managed to seize a bit of land, and from there they'll be able to strike straight out to Mykolaiv and over to Odessa as well. 2 big and important cities, especially in terms of Ukraine's naval capabilities. So Crimea is incredibly important in terms of militaristic value. Next, we have Rostov. Now, for those of you who have been following the channel know that I know this region very well. This is where the channel actually started on the Ukrainian side. And Rostov has seen a bit of a build-up of Russian forces. So, for me, it would be incredibly sad if we were to see actual Russian forces coming along here and trying to break this contact line. I'm very, very passionate about this area. It's already suffered so much because of the war, and I think that would just be terribly upsetting, personally for me, if we were to see this. So I'm really hoping that these scenarios which I'm about to paint out for you don't come to pass. And let's look up here. This is where we're seeing the bulk of the Russian build-up. This is where they've got the majority of their forces, which is actually about 155 miles away from the Ukrainian border. So that might sound like a lot, but it's only going to take them a few hours to cover that if the go-ahead is given. It's very well situated to the M4, which is actually, I've looked on satellite, a very good road in Russia. It's incredibly well repaired, and as a result, perfect for supplies and logistics to bring a lot of the troops down here. And then from there, you can jump on the E40, the E50, and before you know it, you'll be in eastern Ukraine. So if that is the objective of Putin, let's take a look at 4 potential options. And I've listed them in order of least likely to most likely. So option 1, and again I consider this the least likely, is that Putin tries to take all of Ukraine. Now, I really can't see this happening. This is going to be a massive push. He would immediately try and strike out for Kyiv. Obviously, anyone who has studied war knows if you want to take something out, their capital is the number 1 goal. Along the way, he could push through the contact line here, Mariupol, come down to Mykolaiv. He's got troops in Moldova and Crimea to join him. Dnipro used to be an incredibly important military city in the USSR. Kharkiv, a massive big city. These are little things he could snag on the way to Kyiv. Once he's got that, the issue is, now this is where this gets a bit unrealistic. Once he's at Kyiv, he's got these cities. He's still got that length to travel again. Ukraine is an incredibly wide country, and I think by the time he's got forces doing this, I think there will be some intervention from the West. They're not going to allow Russian forces to take all of Ukraine and push up to the Polish border. Poland doesn't want Russian troops on its borders. Obviously, we have a Russia-controlled state here, but there's going to be different to having a massive front controlled by Russian troops and Russian army. And don't forget, obviously, we've got Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. They're all part of the EU, NATO members. They're not going to want this either. So I don't think they're going to allow it to happen, to be honest. Germany has been talking about military action. The UK already has troops in Estonia to stop any Russian aggression there. So it's not a big stretch for the idea of them to send it to Ukraine. So all in all, I can't see this scenario actually happening. I think it would be a big stretch for me, and it will get a big international reaction, which I don't think Putin will want to risk. And given the actual vastness of Ukraine, I don't think he will be able to overpower the Ukrainian army and conquer the entirety of Ukraine before the West sends any supplies or troops. Now, in this video, I'm not actually going to focus on a Russian army versus Ukrainian army who will win, but if that is interesting to you, put it in the comments and I will look about doing that next week. But on this video, I just want to focus purely on the logistics and the possibilities of what might happen. So option number 2, and we are starting to get a bit more into the realm of possibility here, is that he conquers East Ukraine. Now, for those of you who don't know Ukraine too well, East and West Ukraine, there's quite a separation between the two parts of the country. And it's not just a geographical thing, but it also is parts of the language, cultural, the condition of the road. I drove across Ukraine and I noticed such a difference from being in West Ukraine to being in East Ukraine. And I think a lot more people, it's much more of a Russian-speaking area, and I feel that, you come to Lviv where they speak Ukrainian, I don't think that, you can't imagine that. This feels like a very European city, whereas here you do start to feel that old Russian kind of USSR feeling still. They've not quite let go yet. And they are going in the right direction. They're not by any means Russian at all. I'm not trying to infer that. But you do notice a bit of a cultural difference in the east and the west. We also have here the Dnipro River, and I've drawn that out in blue just so you can see it a bit more clearly. As you can see, it goes right from the top of the country all the way down to the south. And this is kind of an incredibly important river because it gets incredibly wide. So it's really, really easy to defend once you've controlled half of it. So say, for example, Russian troops were to enter Ukraine and conquer half the country, they will be able to set up base pretty easily and defend this part of the river. If I'm honest, any kind of aggressive counterattack from the Ukrainian side would be incredibly hard once Russia has managed to dig in along this river. In Kyiv as well, the river actually goes through it, and the majority of Kyiv is on the west side. But this would allow the Russian army, if they didn't even cross into Kyiv, to be positioned incredibly close. So it puts the pressure on Kyiv if this military goal was to be accomplished. Now, I do actually have a photo of the river going through Kyiv. I took this last year just to give you an idea of what that looks like. As you can tell, it is quite wide, and it does get incredibly wide as you're going out of Kyiv as well. But this river to me seems like for them, it would be I wouldn't say it would be an easy goal to get to, but it would be an easy goal to defend once they've managed to establish it. Pushing further into West Ukraine would be possible, but difficult for Russia. But holding this river here would, I think, actually probably be, it would be a lot easier for them. Option 3 is that they don't go as far as that, and they look at just focusing on a land corridor from the Crimea, which they've already annexed, to actual Russia. So if we look here, this could be controlling something like this. They'd want to probably include the controlled territories or the occupied territories already. Might even possibly push up to Dnipro. And this would be some pretty good goal for Russia, to be honest, because it creates a land access to roads via land to Crimea. At the moment, they're relying on rail, which is working quite well, but there's only limited amounts of arms or of any goods that you can push over the rail. But what it would also do is take control of Crimea's water supply. So for those who don't know, Crimea has largely been without water because the reservoirs that control it are actually based in Ukraine. And when Russia took over, they just said, "Fine, you can make them, you can supply the water yourself." And Russia has been trying incredibly hard. They've been shipping water in, they've been trying to build pipes, and they did actually build a pipe recently. And that was supposed to be the end of all the water problems for Crimea, but there's still massive lacks of water in the city. And with a really hot summer coming up, you can kind of see why that might be a little goal that Putin wants to take to kind of ease the pressure a bit that's on Crimea. And option four, and I think out of all the options presented, this will be the most likely if any military action was to happen. And that would be very, very similar to what we saw in Crimea. So this is the occupied zone here. As you can see, it just goes around Luhansk, Donetsk, all the way down to the outskirts of Mariupol onto the village of Shirokino. And within this, obviously, there are Ukrainians and some ethnic Russians. It's a bit of a mixed bag. This was part of Ukraine. Over 1 million Ukrainians left it when the war kicked out in 2014. And since then, over the last 2 years, for those of you who have been following the channel for a long time, you'll remember that we did actually report this, but Russia started to hand out passports. And at the time, it was an incredibly slow process and nobody really wanted one. And last year, Putin upped that game. Like, it was almost a situation of you will have a passport. And now there's around 500,000 passports handed out, which is so important because in the eyes of Putin, in the eyes of the Russian state and their justification, they're saying that 500,000 Russians live here. And it doesn't matter if they were Ukrainian and have a Ukrainian passport too, they now hold a Russian passport, which is a really good justification, no matter how immoral it may be, but for Putin to say, well, these are my people, these are part of my country. And I can really see if there was to be any military action, that the military forces would just come straight down the M4 here and across the E40, E50 to Luhansk and Donetsk. And because those positions are already held by the breakaway regions, by the rebels, it would essentially be bloodless. It would just be Russian forces officially coming here, and we know they're there in unofficial capacity, but for them to officially come here and hold this border against Ukraine and take control of this area. And I wouldn't be surprised if that were to happen. It wouldn't be long before, as we saw in Crimea, Russia's parliament is meeting to annex this area under the justification of it's protecting its citizens. Now, of all of this, I think this would be the most likely because this is something that would be kind of fast. It would be bloodless, essentially, because unless Ukraine actually was to push back against the Russian army, they're on the wrong side of this line to be able to do anything about it. And the international community, as sad as I am to say it, wouldn't really do anything about it at all. They would raise some complaints and they would say it's scandalous, but nobody's going to go into military action and get boots on the ground just for this region, which is almost under Russian control as it is. Now, that would be different if all of Ukraine was being threatened with an invasion, but if it was just this region, I really don't think the international community would do something. It's very, very similar, or Putin set it up to be similar, to be like Austria in 36. So, and we saw people just stand by and watch that happen. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened again. And another good thing, if the international, and this would be a good thing for Putin, if the international community did do anything, they would do sanctions. That's what they're best at. The US is preparing new sanctions actually, and they would just sanction high-flying people in Russia, and it would affect its economy. But, and this is where it really plays into Putin's hand, the Russian economy is already tanking. Coronavirus has hit it incredibly hard, and it's not really recovering as well as it should. So this could be the perfect excuse. Putin gets a quick victory by doing this. He gets a lot of those nationalist crowds, people cheering, he whips up a bit of a fever back home, and everyone loves that. And then when the sanctions start, he can blame that for the economy. He doesn't have to take any responsibility. He can say, well, it was fine before those Europeans put sanctions on us, essentially playing the victim. And I think it would be a really smart move for him to do that. I'm not saying I want it to happen. It would be absolutely awful. But with this build-up happening, I think this would be the most likely if military action was given the go-ahead. However, I still do think that this whole thing is a bit of a feint. I think the most likely out of everything, if anything was to happen, would be that we see nothing, that this kind of disappears from the news, the Russian troops kind of start to demobilize on the border after a few weeks or months, and hopefully people just go back to their houses, go back to their bases, and nothing would happen. That's what I'm really hopeful for. And I've been talking to a lot of commanders and some troops on the Ukrainian front line, and the mood there is still pretty calm actually, and a lot of them are still thinking that this is the likely scenario, that these are just scare tactics to show that they can, and eventually this will all kind of settle back down, and hopefully won't be a short summer war. I did speak to one Ukrainian soldier who told me that the mood is calm, but they are ready for them. And for every step Russia takes into Ukraine, they will pay it heavy with blood. So let's hope that isn't the case, but it is reassuring to know that the Ukrainian army is on standby and ready for this. If it is of interest to anyone, I will actually do a video to see how well the armies of the two countries stand up. So yeah, drop me some comments below if that's what you want to see. And as always, please do like and subscribe and share this video if you can. I'm really trying to grow this channel. I want to take it full time. I've got a few new series coming out, so please do anything you can to support it. I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate if you could just like it and get some exposure happening to it. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you found this useful, and I will be back next week with some more conflict coverage. Have a great Sunday, guys. Take care.